Moana Meki.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Chair, and another wonderful contribution from Maggie Barry on a very important piece of legislation. And as a member of the Local Government Environment Select Committee that considered the bill, I do want to thank the officials who worked on this piece of legislation, who did a wonderful job of defending the indefensible with dignity and with professionalism. It was obviously a piece of legislation where it was difficult for them to come up with the reasons as to why we were doing this, and that was clear right throughout the submission process. Because the very basis upon which this bill was premised, which was that debt is out of control in local government, has been proven to be utterly false. Dr Smith put up figures when he was the minister in charge of the bill that claimed that debt and spending was out of control, and those figures were so dodgy that the ministry had to take them down off the website. Absolutely true. And it wasn't that long ago, of course, that Business New Zealand was criticising local government for having a lazy balance sheet, saying that they needed to invest more, spend more on infrastructure. And then suddenly Dr Smith, because he has an ideological issue with how local government is run in New Zealand and wants to see that changed according to his desires and his whims, manufactured a crisis, as only Dr Smith can do, in order to justify these draconian and very, very damaging changes to the Local Government Act. Because there has not been an expansion of services since 2002, when Labor introduced the four well-beings, which are the environmental, economic, cultural and social well-beings of communities, into the Local Government Act. What it did do, though, was it provided the flexibility for each council to decide for themselves, not dictated from Wellington, not dictated by the Minister of Local Government, to decide for themselves what the priorities of local government would be in those communities. And that's very important when you consider the large number of provincial councils that we have around the country. And I think nowhere is the dangers and the potential damage of this bill more evident than in the provincial councils around the country. Because our mayors in provincial New Zealand are not politicians, they're community leaders. They're the go-to person when something goes wrong. I look at the Mayor of Kawerau, who's been fronting the very difficult issue of youth suicide in his community. I look at the Mayor of Aportiki, who's been fronting the issue of economic development, of long-term unemployment in the Aportiki community, and he's been a leader in going around the world to find investment and create jobs in Aportiki. I look at mayors right across the country and the role that they have in fronting up to national media, to national questioning about what's going on in their communities, and I thank them for that role that they carry out. And that's right, I look at Mayor Meng Foon in Gisborne, who's been a passionate advocate for reopening the Gisborne to Napier rail line. Now, that's a reality of local government in provincial New Zealand, and yes, people are concerned about rates. But the reason for rates going up has been an underinvestment over a long period of time in core infrastructure that is now caught up with local councils. Now, one of the reasons why that happens is a lack of forward planning. So ironically, this bill takes out the requirement for any forward planning to ensure that we don't end up in the same situation again, where infrastructure spending has fallen behind because people are elected to councils on tickets of no rate increases, which means that councils weren't able to invest in wastewater, for example, or water quality, or any other range of infrastructure projects that are critical to their local districts. The other reason that rates have increased is because here in this chamber we often put requirements on local government that cost, but we don't provide the funding to cover that cost. So if you look around the issues of wastewater treatment, around the issues of water quality, these are all things that have been imposed by Parliament, and often for very, very good reason, that fall on local government to carry out, but they don't get any increase in funding. That's right, microchipping of dogs, my colleague from Christchurch points out. But the funding doesn't fall to local government from central government to carry that out. So that has to be paid for somehow, because Parliament has passed a law saying to councils, you must do this, you must find out how to pay for it, and that means, of course, that you're going to get rates increases to cover that. So we all agree that infrastructure for local authorities is important. It's something they do need to be investing in. So you can't then turn around and talk out the other side of your mouth and say, but rates should never be going up because that's a bad thing, so we're going to gut local government in New Zealand and that's going to arrest the rise in rates increases, because it simply won't. And we had a very good submission when we were up in Auckland from the Auckland District Law Society, who did an actual breakdown of where the costs to local government fall and where the impacts of rates would come, and it's not in the area of social well-beings, it's not in the area of cultural well-beings, it's in the provision of infrastructure. Overwhelmingly, the cost of local government, Mr Chair, thank you, the costs of local government, which are then passed through to ratepayers, are to pay for core infrastructure. Are members of the National Party saying that they do not want local government to be spending money on core infrastructure in their areas, that they want to see cutbacks in that in order to reduce rates? Because I tell you what, taking social well-beings out of this legislation will do nothing to reduce rates. Nothing to... We will bring them back. We will bring back the 4 well-beings. Annette King has an SOP to that effect on the table today. And you know why we'll bring them back, Mr Chair? Because we actually listened to local government when they said we want the 4 well-beings. We actually listened to councils, to mayors who overwhelmingly came to the Local Government Select Committee and said, we want the 4 well-beings. We don't want you to gut local government in New Zealand. We don't take the arrogant, ideological approach of the National Party, which is that because Nick Smith doesn't like them, then they must go for everyone across the country. Because one council up in Northland has got itself into financial difficulty, that means that all of local government is rotten and must be gutted. What a ridiculous premise for a piece of legislation. Well, and David Bennett says I should sit down. Maybe he should stand up and explain to his council who opposed this legislation. Hamilton likes it. That shows how in touch that member is with his own council. Because the 4 well-beings which are being removed in this legislation are core to the function of local government in New Zealand. And I think if you look at the Bay of Plenty as a very good example, the Bay of Plenty mayors came together to submit to the Local Government Select Committee as a group. We had the Mayor of Tauranga, the Western Bay of Plenty, Kawerau, Aportiki, Whakatane and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council all came before the Select. I don't think I've ever seen them as angry as they were when they came before the Select Committee to say, butt out, it ain't broke in the Bay of Plenty. We don't need your help fixing it. Thank you very much. In fact, we work together very well already. In terms of amalgamation, we share services already. We are functioning very well as a region. We don't need this legislation. And in fact, this legislation takes us backwards. And the Mayor of Kawerau raised a very good point. He said, do you know how much debt the Kawerau Council has? 0. 0. So why are you imposing a piece of legislation which guts the very basis upon which the Mayor of Kawerau has been able to be a leader in his community, not just on economic issues, not just on environment issues, but on social issues as well. On the very difficult issue of youth suicide in Kawerau, that Mayor has been a leader. And I want to raise the example of another very good local government initiative, the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. Under this legislation, not under the mandate of local government, not something local government should be concerning themselves with. And the reality is, the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, as Grant Robertson said, has done more for addressing youth unemployment in New Zealand than this national government has in 4 years in government. The Mayor's Task Force for Jobs is a wonderful initiative which is grassroots-led. It's led by mayors and councils who know their communities far better than Nick Smith does, far better than the Minister and the Chair does, far better than members in this House do. Across the country, they know what's going to work. They've been working with local businesses, they've been working with iwi, they've been working with training providers to ensure that the very unique needs of each provincial area around the country are met. And they are able to be met because our Local Government Act provides that flexibility. Flexibility which is being ripped out of the legislation in Part 1 of this bill today. And I want to thank all the mayors who've been part of the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, who've managed to achieve 0 unemployment around the country for 18 and 19-year-olds and ensuring that they are there. It's something that the national government hasn't managed to do in 4 years of government. Why? Why would the national government send a message to local government that this isn't something they should be doing? That youth unemployment, that's not your area, you should just stick to rates, rubbish and roads. As one of the mayors who came for our select committee said, it's actually cruel to tell us that we cannot represent our communities and be involved in the social needs and the cultural needs of our communities, as well as the environmental needs and the economic needs. Because as he said, I don't want to be a mayor who's just in charge of potholes. I'm here for the people of my district and the people of my city not just to be the guy who makes sure that the rubbish is picked up on time every Tuesday and Wednesday morning. And that was the message that we got across the board. And I have to say, the submitters who came for the select committee, the small number that there were who supported this bill, when they were actually tested, when they were actually questioned, didn't have the answers.
I'm going to call Dennis O'Rourke.
The National Party, Mr Chairman, hates local government.